Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and thank you so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally the use of sound for health and wellness. This episode continues our series on instrument makers, and today we have with us Jim Doble, who I was lucky to meet at the Gong Summit back in 2019, where some of his unique instruments were displayed. So for over 30 years, Jim has created new percussion and mallet instruments with new sounds. He creates unique, custom, experimental, and one-of-a-kind musical instruments using recycled or repurposed materials, such as glass, stone, wood, and metal. His customers have been professionals, schools, science and children museums, playgrounds, music therapy centers, sound healing practitioners, and novices. His musical instruments are well built for years of playing and are made in many tunings, including custom and experimental tunings. His shop is off-grid and solar powered, and really many of his instruments are taken from scraps from the junkyard and turned into functional works of art. In this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see Jim showing the instruments and images of instruments, and I have also inserted audio of the instruments as well, edited them in so you can hear what they sound like. So please enjoy this podcast, getting to know more about Jim and his unique handcrafted musical instruments. And thank you so much to the Om Shop and Spa for their sponsorship of this podcast. The Om Shop is located in Sarasota, Florida, as well as online at theomshop.com. And they have a wide variety of vibrational tools, sound healing instruments, and the country's largest showroom of crystal vibrational tools. So please check out the Om Shop and Spa. Whether you're in Sarasota, Florida, stop in the showroom, go into the luxury spa, or online, you are able to get assistance as well if you're trying to up-level your tools for your sound healing practice. Thank you so much for their sponsorship. And please enjoy this podcast with Jim Doble. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining me for this conversation about your work and your instruments and who you are. And before we actually get into the instruments that you design, I'd like to go back to early Jim and the things that inspired you to actually first make instruments. You know, what was that like? What was influential to you to get into this work?
Yeah, well, it does go back a ways because back when I was probably, I think it was before I was walking, I used to crawl around my kitchen floor, get into the cabinets, pull out all the pots and pans and find spoons and bash away. And my mother was actually fairly tolerant of that for some reason, maybe because I was occupied, but that's where my music career started. And so all, the instruments I've been playing most of my life are things I could bang on. So yeah, so there was that. And then when I was a little bit older, I was sent off to piano lessons with a not very creative teacher, and that didn't really take so well. So a couple of years after that, I just sort of stopped music. But then when I got into my 20s, I started playing a little bit of hand percussion, African style drums, congas, and was into that. And then I did make one mountain dulcimer out of a kit sort of in those days, but nothing really into the instrument making. But and then I went to, if you're familiar with Paul Winter from the Paul Winter Consort, he was giving a workshop in Maine for the benefit of this woman, Helen Nearing. And it was a week-long improvisation workshop on the coast of Maine, beautiful location. And I decided to go to that without really, I wasn't super musical at the time, but I enjoyed drumming and whatever. I enjoyed playing with other people. So I went to that. And he had borrowed this big xylophone based off a Ugandan design, the Amadinda. The keys were out of 2x6s. It was a very rough instrument. You would sit on the floor and play it. And traditionally, the Ugandan instrument is played with 3 people, 2 people across from each other playing syncopated rhythms, and the 3rd person just playing the top 2 keys. And whenever one of the other musicians would play a corresponding key an octave or 2 below his 2 keys, then he would hit those keys. And that instrument, what makes playing that instrument interesting is when that top rhythm gets really complicated. And me and this other guy that were at the workshop, we played that a bunch while I was there, and we really liked it. So when we decided after the workshop to come back to my place and build one. And so I built a similar one out of 2x6s that you'd play sitting on the floor. And then I really like to move around when I play, so I decided to play with the design and make a version that I could stand up. And I came up with a design that was basically, the keys were hung up like a hammock on string and could play it that way. And this was a big instrument. It's about 5 to 6 feet long. The longest key is about 3 feet long. So you can get multiple people playing it. You don't have to play Ugandan style. It's tuned pentatonically, so you don't really have to worry about what notes you hit. Anything you play, as long as you're rhythmically in tune, sounds good. So I made a bunch of those and playing with the design. And I was going to a dance camp probably a couple of years after I started playing with those. And I've never been there to this particular dance camp before, but they had a place where you could sell things. And I said, well, why don't I make a few and see if I could sell something? I mean, I was kind of I was doing demolition building salvage at the time, and I was looking to do something sort of out of my shop at home. So this was kind of a test run to see if I could make a go at, building instruments. And so I brought 4 of them to this dance camp. I sold all 4, and I said, okay, I can do this. And that sort of started me off on the instrument making. And then and it was, many years of doing that. I started with the big wooden xylophone. And then I got into playing with glass, with stone, different metals, different designs. I was making stuff that other people weren't, because that's what I was interested in, finding new sounds, new ways to make a bit of noise.
Right. And I know that you use a lot of recyclable, reusable materials. Were there any wow moments? I mean, a part of the design is the experiment, which means it doesn't always work out. Yeah. What were some of those moments that were great learning lessons early on?
So the glass was probably the second material I started playing with, and that I'd read other people using glass, so that wasn't such a big deal. But when I started with the stone, it was with old roofing slate, and I had a pile of it. I'm not sure why. I had a pile of it sitting by my barn, and one day I just sort of looked at the pile, and I kind of go, "Huh, I wonder what that sounds like." And so I cut some up, and it was like, "Whoa." I was really surprised. I was like, that was definitely a wow moment. And I was lucky because my pile of slate happened to be Monsoon Slate, which comes from northern Maine, which is a really high quality slate, and sound quality wise, it's the best I've tried so far. I've tried all kinds of slates now, mostly from old roofing stuff, and so that was definitely a wow moment. And probably and then I got into different stones. I started doing granite um, scraps from countertops, and that was also another wow moment because that has it'd be much thicker and um, really nice tone. I mean, that's an instrument I could play for all day long and not get tired of playing it, just because it's just sweet sound. Then probably the other wow moment is I also had I kind of collect junk a little bit. It's kind of a bad habit of mine. And I had some old water tanks for water pressure systems kicking around. And I sort of looked at one of those one day and said, kind of, because I'd already started making wooden tongue drums. And I looked at these and I was like, well, why not? And so I cut some tongues into them, and those were fantastic. And that's an instrument that I sort of kept developing, and right now in my business selling instruments, those are probably more than half of what I sell are just those particular instruments, metal tongue drums, and they're big ones. They're my instrument making business evolved from making instruments for individuals. I'd go to craft fairs and sell them, which I don't recommend unless you like listening to people beat on your breakable instruments all day long. And so that's how I started out. But then I got into the playground. I started making stuff for playgrounds and children's museums. And so I, making bigger, heavier duty, indestructible stuff. And that's when my business really took off, because the timing was just about right. There was only one other guy making quality musical stuff for playgrounds, and he's in New Mexico. And it was just at the time when people were wanting to get really creative with what they had out there on the playgrounds. The old jungle gyms just weren't doing it anymore for people. So I hit it right. And then when the recession in the 80s came, Obama put a lot of grant money out there for preschools. And if you're preschool and all of a sudden you get this wad of money, the easiest place to put it is in your playground. And that's while everybody else was like hurting for work, I was booming. I was like crazy. So that's basically,
Right.
the business. And then I got into the, that slowly developed into the sound healing, sound therapy work.
Yeah. What was your first experience with the therapeutic use of sound? How did you get involved in that?
Totally by accident, like everything else. I was playing I can't remember who was playing who, but I was playing a glass instrument and a slate instrument with a friend. And the slate instruments, I didn't always tune a 440. I let them sort of go where they wanted to. And so it was tuned slightly off from what my glass instrument was. And we were playing together and we were just improvising. We weren't trying to do anything. And every now and then I would hear a combination of the two notes that made this third sound that I felt affect me. It was like there was this extra wah 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 thing going on. And it was like, that's doing something to my brain. and this was before the internet, long before the internet. And so I wanted to figure it out. So I went to the libraries and started taking books out and trying to get it. It ended up, it was, what I was hearing was a beat frequency. And it was probably a low theta frequency. And yeah, that grabbed my interest. So I just started doing, there wasn't a lot out there at the time, research wise, but I grabbed what I could. And I said, well, this is cool. So I started making instruments, some of my instruments specifically for sound work, mostly using the glass at that time. I made some instruments with built-in beat frequencies. And then I think, probably after a couple of years experimenting, I heard about a sound healers colloquium in New Hampshire. It was just a gathering of sound healers from all over the world. I mean, it was amazing. It went on for like, I think every year for 5 or 6 years. And, all the pioneers in the sound healing field were there pretty much. So it was astounding. I mean, it was being able to glean from all these people that have been working on it for years was pretty amazing opportunity. And yeah, so that led me to get even further into that field. And then it took me a while before I got into the gongs. Before I started practicing, I was making instruments for them, and then eventually that led. It took me a while, but I started to actually being a practitioner as well.
Yeah, what do you think changed in your approach besides kind of searching for those beats? And if you were making a gong for a playground versus a gong for the therapeutic use, what was kind of your philosophy going into making that instrument?
Yeah, well, like the gongs, at first I was only making them for children's museums and playgrounds, the aluminum gongs. I didn't really take them seriously as an instrument when I started making them. I mean, I think they sounded good, and they, but this isn't a real gong, but it is indestructible, and so it's a good one for kids to bash. And it wasn't really till the sound healing conference that Mitch, did a few years ago that getting that feedback from people like, that wow, they're cool gongs, and they, and I was already playing gongs at that point, but I hadn't included those in my own, and I was part of that was, all my gongs were bronze at that time, and I had this. I don't know why, but I had this thing about mixing metals that was maybe bad juju, and so I sort of never did it. And then after getting the good feedback at the conference, and I decided, well, I should try using these, and it works. It's mellow, they do this. I have these Burmese gong, which is amazing. The gongs I make are also nipple gongs, and so you can't see it, but the one above that is I've tuned that to a beat frequency for this one, and together they are pretty cool. I mean, the Burmese gong can overwhelm the aluminum gong pretty easily, but if I'm playing them soft, they do some really nice magic together.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of your creations. I know you have some photos to share. So see where you want to start with those and kind of talk about each of them and how they came about.
Okay. Sure. Well, we were talking about the gongs, so why don't we start with those?
Yeah.
Um, so there's basically what's behind me right now. um, so the two aluminum gongs at the top are tuned a fifth apart. So that sets up a kind of a nice thing. I make those up to the biggest ones I make are about 36 inches, which is what that one that's over the Burmese gong is. That's close to 36 inches. And that's like a low B to correspond with that Burmese one. And I've made them thanks to some people that have like wanted various sizes gongs. I've made all the way from that size to little tiny ones, that are like 10 inches, which are a little hard to tune because they're so particular. But yeah, the nice thing about the aluminum gongs is I can tune them pretty precisely. Mike Tamburo has ordered quite a number of them from me, and he's the one that really got me to improve my quality and my tuning, because he was looking for specific frequencies.
Right. So
wanted
unlike a wind gong or something, you can play them more melodically, right?
Yeah, these are more tonal, so they have more of a defined pitch than a wind or a chow. And yeah, so it's nice that way. And then I've played with, when I cut, so I get a big sheet of aluminum, and I cut the circles out of it, and I had all this leftover aluminum that I wasn't doing anything with. And some of the cutouts were kind of interesting shapes. And I don't have a photo of those except for the triangles. But anyways, I sort of decided to just play with shapes and see what, I had this leftover aluminum, might as well do something with it. So I started making star-shaped ones, ones that are kind of wing-shaped, and then I made some triangle-shaped ones. And I can show you the triangle-shaped ones. So they're the triangles. Can you see them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And those have a nice, bright sound to them, very defined pitch. Yeah, and there's, yeah, so it's been kind of fun to play with that. And I've also played with the shape a little bit of a round gong, and I'm going to share my screen again. So there's a oval one. When I was playing with the stars, I would, the stars are like a 4-point star, and they would be equal widths and height, mostly. But then I thought, well, why not mess around with it a little bit? Because what you're basically getting when you hit the middle of the star shape, setting a wave pattern this way, up and down and sideways. And so I started playing with sort of having two tonal star shaped ones. And I kind of like that. And then I was like, well, why not apply that to a gong, a round gong? So this was my experiment with that. So I cut it with the idea that I would have a fifth, would be an interval of a fifth between the long part of the gong and the shorter side of the gong. It did not turn out that way. It was close. It actually
Sounds challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I can, it's something I can play with more, but it ended up being about a fourth. And I was thinking that it would be sort of a low pitch with an overtone. Actually, what it ended up being was the higher pitch with an undertone. So the lower tone is actually sort of very much in the background, where the higher pitch comes out clearer. Um, so it's very subtle, but it's kind of cool, and I want to play with that some more. Because it's fun to play.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Why
Uh,
don't we stay with metals? What else? Any of your
I'll go back to that first photo.
right?
So the chimes that are up to the upper right and upper left, those are just aluminum pipe. They're pretty thick aluminum pipe. They're Schedule 40. And I've been making chimes for a long time. That's something I make for my playground instruments. Somehow or that, but usually I'm hanging them vertically, like a wind chime would. And these, so I could get them on a gong rack better, I decided to make them horizontal. Actually, it was Michelle Michener ordered the very first ones of these. She wanted something like that, and I was like, okay. And I made her a set, and I was like, wow, the sustain is really, really nice on them. And so one of the tricks about aluminum pipe, if you get the low grade stuff, which I'm cheap, so I get the low grade stuff, is actually the pipe isn't uniform. The wall thickness of the pipe, if you look at the end of it, you can actually see that it's a little thinner in some places, a little thicker in places, which makes it a two-tone instrument. So if you say I have the pipe laid out on a frame, I'll hit it in the middle, and it'll make one tone. If I turn it like a quarter turn, then it can make another tone about maybe with a 5-cent difference or so. If I turn it just the right position, you can actually get both tones. And it sets up a beat frequency. And for some reason, if you're hitting it so you get that beat frequency, and I'm not sure why this is, as far as the physics go, but it seems to really help the sustain. I can hit that lower bar and it'll ring just about forever. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going. And I'm using these outside in my gong baths, and the sound is, loud and clear enough, and whatever, it carries really nicely. So I'm really happy with those. And then I have 2 of them hanging there because, I have this thing about, I want to sort of, I like bending the mind a little bit. And so I decided to make, they have, each one of those notes has a beat frequency within itself, but then I made another set that was slightly off tuned to the other one to set up kind of like a double beat. And when they're going together, it's really pretty cool. It's pretty crazy. So
Very cool.
remember when I back to the water tank that I wanted to play with? This was one of my original ones. I made this for my nieces and nephew down in Massachusetts. I use my family as a lot of experiments. Um, so my brother and his kids ended up getting a lot of my first instruments because, someone had to try them out besides me. And so they got a lot. This was one of the original ones. And I don't know if you can see in the picture, but there's the top part of the whale, which is a tongue, but then there's solid metal as part of the whale where it bends around, but then I've made also the tail into a tongue. And the tail didn't musically wasn't that great, but the head of it was. So this was one of my original ones, and so that one has tongues on it too. I played with different shapes. This one I changed the shape of a little bit. This was another experiment. It didn't sound as good with the tongues going around the side because there wasn't as much tension in the tongues. The roundness of the top of the tank gives the tongue some resistance to bending, so it's a better tonal quality, where this is more similar to playing like flat metal. And then there's another one of my other versions, and then here's sort of my current ones. These are made from propane tanks. You can see where the fittings were on the top of the tank, and then the plain side is the bottom of the tank. So I cut the tanks in half and then cut the tongues. And these are really cool. This was another, like I said before, this was kind of another wow moment. And I had a really wow moment with these. I was down at the Clearwater Revival Festival in New York, selling things they had a craft area. I was selling things there. This guy came up and started playing one of these. It was just sitting on the ground. And he started just going nuts. I mean, he was like so happy. He was just, just really enjoying it. It's like, wow, this is, it's kind of nice. Ends up he was deaf. And because the sound is deep and solid and resonant enough, the sound actually carries into the ground and up through the body.
So cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was happy, and one of the things I have in my future is wanting to build some of these specifically for use for deaf people that really can carry the sound. That's on my hopefully nearby agenda. Then I'm not sure what I have after this. Yeah, so there's a large one built out of a 1,000-gallon tank, and this is my newer version. I get my propane tanks from this one company where I get their old ones that aren't any good anymore, but I was starting to get having a hard time getting them from them. They had new owners bought the company and they weren't so free with their propane tanks anymore. So these I can buy, when they manufacture propane tanks, there's one company that makes just the tops, and there's another company that puts the tops onto the cylinder to make a full-size tank. So what I do is I buy just the tops that are seconds. They can't use them for propane tanks, so they just sell them for junk basically. So I get those, and then I put them on one of those tall, skinny propane tanks as the stem. So these are fungophones. And they're cool. They sound similar to the whale drums. The sound doesn't carry into the ground as well, but they also, on top of they're connected to the stem just by one bolt in the middle. And so they're more of a combination of the tongue drum and a bell. If you just hit the side of it, then you get a bell sound.
Mm-hmm.
So
Love that. Very cool.
Yeah, that was a way for me to keep doing it. And then we move into so there's the, and then we move into the, get up to the Yellow Submarine. So normally I would cut off the ends of this tank to make the whale drums. But I decided I wanted to, get it a little bit deeper in, and I'd experimented with making whale drums that you could get underneath. They had a arch cut into them, and you could like crawl underneath them, and so somebody else could play it from the top, and you'd be under there getting the vibes directly from the bottom, and that was okay. But I wanted more. So this, you play from the inside. You can see this one end is, you see the tongues on one end. There's also tongues on the other end.
Okay.
I have the ends tuned to set up a beat frequency. So one end is tuned, in a fairly normal pentatonic tuning, and the other end is a theta beat away from that. But when you play one tongue, everything vibrates. And so even if you're just playing one end, you have one person playing end, the other end is still going to be harmonizing with it, and sets up some really, it's when you're playing it from the outside, it has one sound, but when you're inside, you're hearing everything, and it's just rather mind-blowing. It's really good for meditating. I mean, some people go in there and they'll play like fast. They'll play it like it was a drum set or something. But
right.
but then it gets messy. But if you play slowly, it's just incredibly meditative, incredibly, very visceral. It's kind of like, when gong players ask me, what it's like to be in there, the best description I'd come up with is like being inside a gong.
Right. Wow.
So it's pretty cool.
And that must be what led to the Gong Tunnel, literally inside.
Yeah. Well, the Gong Tunnel is basically, this is a 500-gallon tank. I sometimes get 1,000-gallon tanks, big hot dog style tanks, and when I cut the ends off to make the whale drums, I end up with this big cylinder. So, after piling up cylinders in my yard, thankfully I live back in the woods, so I don't have any neighbors hollering at me for having all this junk in my yard. I kind of wondered, well, what it would be like to, set it up as sort of a, not quite enclosed, but a gong chamber. So that's what I did. This was my original one. It has, I don't have the gongs set up on it all the time. Whenever I set them up, but this is my 38-inch wind gong on this end, and then I have a chow on the other end. There's a chow. That's a 40-inch chow. That's it on the inside. I had a sort of open house for my various instruments and whatever that I did. So this was a number of years ago, and that was from that. And these couple very much liked being inside there. So what's cool about it is you don't have to play loudly, obviously. You wouldn't want to play loudly with people in there. But it's, all the subtleties of the gong are just really come out clear in there. Like when you're standing right in front of your gong, when you're playing a gong, right, you're getting one experience, and the people that are over there are getting a slightly different experience because you're picking up so much more from it than they are. Well, in this, you sort of, it's all there. So it's very cool. And I don't think, and that's looking at it at the end. And I built another one recently. So this is something I built for myself. I never, thought to make this as an instrument to sell to anybody. But there's the photos of this are on my website. And this winter, I get a call from somebody and says, "Hey, I want a Gong Tunnel." I'm like,
oh, wow.
Really? Why? And this is somebody that doesn't even play the gong. They've never touched a gong in their life, but they saw it and they were like, "Yeah, I think it looked like something cool." And so, it was like, I wasn't sure how I was going to get it to them. They're down in Baltimore. Right. I'm in Maine.
Okay.
So anyway, so I what I did is I used a slightly shorter tank. It's this tank is 42 inches diameter, and about, I think it's about 18 feet long, 18 to 19 feet long. Theirs I made shorter, and so it's also a little bit more roomy. It's got a little more height to it. And instead of having the gongs hang on the outside, just on the outside of the tunnel, I made slits in the tank itself to hang the gongs from. And the slits go in about 1.5 feet, so the gongs can be slid further into the tunnel and further out depending on the use. So it's actually, if the gongs are slid all the way in, one person can play both gongs on both ends and do a sort of a self actuated thing, which I really like. I mean, that's the one of the reasons I came up with the Yellow Submarine, and some of my other instruments, is that I really like the idea of people doing their own healing work through sound. I mean, I do sound therapy, to give people to their sessions and do group sessions, gong bass and whatever. But there's something about people being in control of their own thing, and the new version of the Gong Tunnel that I made for these people, that's really good for that.
Right.
The first time the couple got into it, the first time it was set up, and they didn't ever want to come out. I mean, they'd never played gongs before. I gave them a quick lesson on, how to play a gong, and they didn't want to come out. When people go into the what's that?
they used it in a, hopefully in a kind of a meditative way. I can imagine that you would just be in there for hours and lose time.
Yeah, definitely. And so the other, the instrument that's really good at sort of self meditation is the Yellow Submarine, because that's another instrument that some people get in and they don't quite, it isn't their cup of tea, but others will get in there and again, they could easily be in there for hours. And I've, had kids in there. My school that my kids used to go to wanted me to bring some instruments there, so I brought it there. And these were preschool kids, and some of them would go in and go nuts, like you would expect, but some of them actually were incredibly just into the quiet, meditative part of it. This is just another take on aluminum chimes. These are, so I worked with a friend. Actually, one of the things that got me into doing the sound therapy work is I had a friend who was sort of in the middle of a Kundalini emergence. She had a lot of sort of energy moving through her, and it wasn't coming clear. It was there was a lot of messiness there. It was being difficult. And so I did some work with this person before I, not really using much instrument wise, but just doing some sound work with the voice and maybe some small instruments. And then afterwards I was thinking, of what I could do to help her, help people like her. Sort of help move energy that needed to move. And after doing a little bit of research here and there and thinking about it and just sitting on it, this is what I came up with. And what this is it's a progression of fifths. That biggest chime, those are 3-inch diameter aluminum pipe. And that longest one is about 9 feet tall. And the sound is, on that one, pretty subtle. I mean, you almost feel it more than you
Right.
than you hear it. But it is audible. And then the next bar will be a fifth of the way up, and so forth and so on. So it's a progression of fifths. And the idea was that to use the fifth as a way to move the energy, to use the people talk about, if you have one tone you're playing with somebody, and sometimes that can resonate with a certain part of your body or a certain mental attitude or a certain thing, and sometimes it can wake up certain things in the body. And the idea of this was to both use the chimes to both wake things up but also to move them. And I think that's what gongs do, because they're so rich in sound. At least the more like the wind gongs, the chow gongs, the more sonically active gongs. So I wanted to do that with a little more control with the chimes. and I'm pretty happy with it. I don't use it a lot because it's a pretty specific um, use, but um, the people that I have used it with seem to be very. There's my son's girlfriend trying it out. Um,
Yeah, you can really get an idea of the size of it with, yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's big. Fortunately, I have this where it's set in my house is I have a sunken octagon-ish floor.
Right.
Otherwise, I don't have room to put it in my house. So I have it like a
You know,
10 foot.
I do have a question about the materials since make many instruments for outdoors. And what um, materials are best for leaving them outdoors instruments so they
Yeah,
won't get
the aluminum
ruined?
is good because
Yeah.
I mean I coat it with a thin coating of oil, um, which hardens on really nice. I mean, it does wear off after a while, but even after that's worn off, I mean, the aluminum really doesn't get hurt by the weather at all. It might discolor slightly and be fine. Um, the steel instruments like the whale drums, those I powder coat paint. So how that works is there's a sprayed on powder that goes into an oven and gets baked on. And so that's a really hard, durable finish. And I don't do that myself. That's done shop elsewhere. Um, and then, the woods I use, I make the original big xylophone I was making was out of spruce, which happens to be what we have in the Northeast for 2x4s from the lumber store, but it's also very resonant. It's musical quality spruce is what's used in guitar tops and similar instruments because of its resonance. So that's, but that doesn't hold up in the weather great. So I also make a mahogany version with mahogany keys, and that's I use sustainably cut mahogany. If there is such a thing. I mean, that's what I'm told. um, and um, I used to, when I first started using mahogany, I would actually take apart old Kubota pallets. They would ship from Japan, they would ship Kubota tractors in mahogany because that's what they have there. And I would like scrounge up those and make it, but they stopped using mahogany for shipping those anymore, so that's non-scroungeable. Yeah, so about anything can be made durable. I also make small instruments out of wrenches and bolts. They're popular in children's museums and
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I believe it was different size wrench xylophone,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And those are the wrenches are already rusty because they're old wrenches, so those are fine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great. Well, yeah, just kind of
yeah.
the last questions is perhaps you already mentioned a couple things you're wanting to build that you have on the list. So maybe any interesting custom things coming in right now that you're doing, or do you have kind of a wish list of I really want to try making this? What's kind of coming into your awareness right now of what needs to be made?
Yeah, so part of my what's going on in my life right now is my business is doing really well. Doing mostly 98% of it is the playground instruments and some of it's individual stuff. And it's taking too much of my time. So what I'm in the process now is cutting back trying to cut back on that, which is hard because people want stuff and it's like, it's hard to tell them to go away. But, because that's what I want to do. I want to get back to just creating new things. So there's the, what I mentioned before is making instruments, particularly for deaf people's use. And then the other thing is, I like building things that mess with the mind a little bit, and trying new ideas along that. There's a lot more I can do with the gongs. I want to try to do more shaped things and more effectual shaped things. That's one of the beautiful things about the aluminum, because these are fairly flat. The nipple gongs that I make are fairly flat, unlike this one, which has a big rim. So this one would, you really couldn't, you have to make this round pretty much, right? But because the aluminum is prone to making them on a flatter side, then it's really easy to play with the shape. So there's a lot of playing I can do with there, with getting multi-tonal gongs and that kind of thing. Playing with different tunings. That's another place to go. And I've done some of that. I made a copper piece with a Balinese tuning, which was pretty cool. But then I had to learn how to play it because it's a really, really different kind of thing. And there's all kinds of tunings out there. There's that I haven't had time to play with, and that's something I'd like to go for. And and now that I'm more out there with my instruments in the sound healing world, I get people that call me up and say, hey, can you do this or something like this, or what do you think of doing this? And that's, that inspires me to dig in a little deeper. Michelle Michener has been good at pushing me. she'll
yeah, you have to have that balance of course, the demand that you're getting for things, but also keeping inspired in the work is when somebody kind of challenges you or pushes you to try something a little different. Yeah.
So it's nice. And and playing still with the designs that I already have, there's more I can do with that. My favorite instrument probably is the Yellow Submarine and similar instruments to that. So I'm definitely going to be doing more there. And I've thought about branching out into different gong material, but there are so many awesome gong makers out there right now that it's like it's already being done, so it's like, so that doesn't inspire me because I want to do stuff that people aren't doing. And I don't get why. I think I'm the only aluminum gong maker out there. There's one guy who's making plates. He's making the rectangular plates, but it's a pretty easy material to work with, and it doesn't take a lot of, you don't have to like gear up with all kinds of tools and whatever. So I would encourage people to, if you want to get into gong making, that's might be a nice place to start.
Yeah, easy to work with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I enjoy doing is I get a lot of calls for people that want to make their own instruments. So, you know, I'm perfectly happy to help them, you know, because I think it's the more people out there doing it, you know, the more creative stuff there's going to be.
Yeah, that's the exciting thing, isn't it? That there's so many different ways. And so the experimentation itself is such a great part of the learning process, that there's a lot of beauty in things not being exactly the same every time.
Oh yeah, 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 definitely. And so um, I mean, you don't see my whole setup, but you can see I have a Sonora gong here, where I didn't believe in mixing metals early on in my gonging days. I have very well mixed now.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Yeah,
and it's, yeah,
yeah,
it's great that so many people are doing things that are, you know, playing with. You know, and yeah, and the incredible artisans that are out there, you know.
that's right. With everybody has their own unique style, and that keeps shifting. I mean, even for you, you keep trying to hone your craft and try different methods. And I think that's why you have the longevity. Is it's still fun, it's still interesting, it's still
Yeah.
transforming you too, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely. And that's why, yeah, and that's, you know, my push, you know, in my own life to get less out of my production mode and more into the creative mode. And, um, you know, the production has been good because it's really let me fine tune a lot of things. You know, you make something over and over again, hopefully get better at it. um, and so, but now it's, you know, it's time for me to open up time to expand on all that. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, great. Thank you so much, Jim, for your time and for showing us kind of your evolution through these instruments. And I'm really excited to see where this all leads for you next as you're trying to balance it all. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sounds Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. Check things out on Facebook at Sounds Heal Studio, and you can listen to all previous podcasts as well as music meditations on the YouTube channel at Sounds Heal Studio. Be well and stay tuned.